And welcome to this week's edition of Conversations. I'm Jeff DeForest. Very happy to have you with us here on Bleacher Brothers Network. Toby's producing today. Always does a great job for us. And he knocked it out of the park. I think he crashed the site. I don't know if this has been mentioned, but with his reports from the Hula Bowl, which I'm thinking this A.J. Johnson is great, the guy who's running the network, because he's shipping guys to Hawaii. But it turns out it was in the buttfuck town of Orlando, so not quite the glamour journey that we had anticipated, and nonetheless met with extreme popularity. And so we're glad to have Toby producing the show. Going to pull back the curtain a little bit today and get behind the scenes in a lot of different areas. As we welcome to the program, my good friend Joe Casale had the pleasure of spending a Sunday night at the Funky Biscuit in Boca Raton with Joe to see the great John Cleary. Joe is a guy who has spent several years living in New Orleans, and I believe he's not living in the past, but he certainly identifies with everything that's relatable to NOLA and the scene there. And we had a great time and a great conversation about many things. And so happy to bring him to you today as our guest on Conversations, former sports agent and very much entrenched in the National Football League, as he's still working network broadcasts on many different levels in various capacities, mostly spotting for guys like Tom Brady and all of the top-notch network announcers that you see on TV. Although we'll get into whether or not Brady qualifies. Certainly as a personality, he's top-notch, but I don't know if he's there yet as a broadcaster. Joe, how are you? Thanks so much for doing this today.
Great, D, folks. Good to be with you.
All right, let's get into your background a little bit. The agent business can be a very dirty and, speaking of funky business as well. So give us a little bit of the background.
Well,
You were an attorney.
my background really started in PR. I when I graduated college, my first job was at Dania Highlight. I was the PR director there, and I was there for a little over 2 years. And then it was Dania Highlight and Milford Highlight. If you remember at that time,
Did
they
you
were both
precede
owned
the
by the
great
same.
Marty Fleischman?
Yeah, well, yeah, Marty was a legend in Miami.
Yes.
And but Dania also owned the Milford, Connecticut Highlight, where I'm from Connecticut originally, and so you spent half the year in Fort Lauderdale, half the year in Milford, and after a little over 2 years, I ended up going back to Connecticut as the sports information director at Quinnipiac, then college, now university, and that's when I got the bug thinking about being an agent, really representing broadcasters, because a lot of my friends were starting to get contracts from ESPN. When ESPN started, 1979, they weren't giving out contracts. And to give you an idea of how it evolved, by 1984, 85, when they were giving out contracts, they had one rule: you can't have an agent. Like we're gonna give you, we're gonna
Sounds
give
like
you
my
the
intro to
contract.
radio. Yeah. You
Yeah,
have an
we're gonna
agent,
give you
and
the
the guy would
contract,
walk as soon as you
and
get
you're
into
gonna sign it.
negotiation.
Right. We're gonna give you the contract, and you're gonna sign it, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I had friends there, and they would kind of sneak the contracts to me, and I would kind of mark them up, ask for this, ask for that, da 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 da. And that's how I started. And I was going to law school at the time, the University of Bridgeport, which is now, ironically, Quinnipiac Law School, because Quinnipiac bought Bridgeport from the Moonies when the Moonies bought Bridgeport. Excuse me. So
Yeah.
it was quite a circle. And so I started with broadcasters, and then evolved to football players and tennis players, and that's kind of how I got started, and then went from there. And I always preface it by saying that was before social media, because social media changed everything. It changed the whole game. I mean, when you're an agent, the old thing used to be, when your phone rings at midnight, that's a bad sign.
Yes.
The rotary phone rings at midnight, it's a bad sign. Now it's you get a text of let's go see who go to your client's Instagram post, and they whatever he posted on IG or X or anything else, and so it's really become a business that you just don't want any part of, and that's the part that I got out of. I couldn't do it anymore. So I ended up selling the firm in 2007. And that was when I had a 5-year no compete. And so, I'm figuring that's good. I'm going to play golf. I'm going to chill out. I'm going to enjoy Florida, da 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 da. And about a year into it, I'm bored as hell. And I said, geez, I got to be doing some stuff. And so friends of mine who are broadcasters said to me, why don't you go and spot for me, you know? And I actually, when I was in college, I spotted one year for Yale football. So that was the last time I spotted. So I said to myself, yeah, why not? You know? So I started doing it, and 18 going on 18 years later, that's what I'm doing. So it's been radio and TV. So it's been fun, and it keeps me around the game, which I like, and it keeps me close enough to the game to enjoy it, but far enough away to not be immersed in it like I was when I was an agent. Because it's a different world now, and it's
Yeah.
not a world that appeals to me as much as it did when I was younger.
Let's talk about some of the details of it. And it's interesting to me. I were involved in the early days of ESPN, and I remember first time I caught ESPN. I didn't get it. I lived in Los Angeles. I moved to South Florida in 1981, July of 1981, and I drove my MGB, which the back window, the plastic window in a convertible, is the first thing to go. So, if it's raining as you're driving
Right,
to Texas, it's pouring into your car there, and I wasn't quite used to weather circumstances in Miami in the summertime, where you could park your car for 2 minutes with the top down, and when you came back, it was completely flooded out. But I was so excited because I had heard about ESPN. It was a novel concept. Think about this. I mean, now you had, well, we were already at the finish of the run of the all sports radio stations, of which there were probably four going at the same time in South Florida,
right.
go back to the early 90s, but this was a genre that was just starting to take off. And of course, sparked by ESPN and the fact that they were going to have an all sports television network. But there wasn't much on there. I mean, it was a lot of women's field hockey,
Australian rules football.
Australian rules football,
Remember the guy,
boxing,
the
getting the
official would
shit
come
kicked
down
out of
from the
them.
goalpost and he put the hands out.
Yeah, and the hat and the whole fucking thing. And you had an endless loop of sports centers hosted by Tom Mees and George
Right.
and and in your wildest imagination, could you have seen or possibly anticipated what would transpire and how ESPN would eventually become
You know,
constant
it's
retailing?
amazing when it started. You know, being up in Connecticut, and it started in Bristol, Connecticut, which is in the middle of nowhere. Excuse me, and Sal Marciano, you know Sal from
Yes.
years of boxing.
Good night,
He
sweet prince. That was
right.
his
He
signature quote.
coined a great phrase of when he left ESPN. He said, "Happiness is seeing Bristol in the rearview mirror." You know, and
Yes.
that became the running gag for when people would leave ESPN. His happiness is seeing Bristol in the rearview mirror, and it was in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you had a strip club down the street in Southington,
Yeah.
and you had this campus on ESPN with a bunch of satellite dishes, and that was it. And it just, I mean, I don't think anybody could have envisioned what it is today. I think the thing that surprises me more than anything else is for years, ESPN was kind of like the troublemaker of the network. You know, they were the wild child.
Yeah.
And now they're the standard. You know, they're established. I mean, it's they're the norm, if you will, and not the wild stepchild. You know, and back in those days, it was wild stepchild time. And there are things, Defo. There was a guy by the name of George Bodenheimer, whose
Yes.
first job at ESPN was driving Dick Vitale. He had to pick Dick Vitale up at the airport and drive him to ESPN to work and go in the studio and do his college basketball shtick. George Bodenheimer became the president of the network.
Wow.
He ended up also being the president of the NFL network. Um, Norby Williamson started out in the mailroom and
Yes.
then ran ESPN until he left, and now he's running front row sports. You're never going to have that again. You're never going to have somebody who starts in a position and can ascend up a ladder like that ever. And that was the more amazing part. I mean, to see a guy. I mean, like I said, George would have to drive to Bradley Airport to pick up Dick Vitale, take him to Bristol, and Dick would do his thing, and then George would take him home. I mean, excuse me, take him to the hotel and then take him to the airport 2 days later. And that guy became the president of the network, and had a phenomenal career.
Pretty incredible.
And,
Yes.
and so you don't have that anymore. You don't have those rags to riches stories.
No.
It's all pretty standard. It's, private equity firms and consultants, and they pick out who they want. And, they're bankrolling it, and you rock and roll. And now the whole industry's changing because regional sports networks are collapsing. Everybody's trying to figure out how to land in the right place for streaming services. And for the consumer, I mean, they don't want to spend $500 a month for sports, so it's kind of like figuring out where they can land. And so the entire industry has changed. Back in those days, it was. I always said when I started out as an agent, people said, "Why'd you leave Connecticut and go to Florida?" I said, "Because that's where the football players were." In the '80s, that's where the football players were. It wasn't just at Miami, Florida, and Florida State. I mean, there were 460 Division I scholarships given in the state of Florida every year. You didn't need to get a lot of kids to stay afloat. It was an old bank robber in the 1920s, Willie Sutton. And for years, he robbed banks all up and down the East Coast. And they could never catch him. They finally caught him one day. And he was sitting in the interrogation room, and the detective that arrested him said, "Willie, why do you rob banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." And really, that's in the 80s, you were staking your claim. Like you were marking your territory. Lee Steinberg was representing quarterbacks. Ralph Sindrich was representing linemen. When I came south, I was handling Florida football players. Drew Rosenhaus started out handling Florida
Yes.
football players. And everybody did that. Now it's like Afghanistan. You don't know where the terrorists are. I mean, the poaching is out of control. The fee structure is completely changed to the point where it's basically larger firms represent rookies for next to nothing because they're all working towards a second contract. And I call that the Sam Bradford rule. If you remember Sam Bradford, when he got
Yes.
out of school, he got a $45 million signing bonus. And that was the beginning of the end for rookie contracts, and then became a rookie salary cap because the veteran players said, "Oh, what are we doing here?" And
Alex
that,
Smith, I guess, was the most egregious
yeah,
example. He was taken number one overall, got $60 million.
yeah. And then what happens is for independent firms, not larger firms, you lived off those rookie dollars. That was important. Once you lose that, and that came after I left, that's tough. I mean, so it's a different firm now. Now you can get lucky and be Rich Paul, and you're LeBron James's best friend, and LeBron James becomes all encompassing, and you become an agent, and LeBron bankrolls you. But that's a rarity. That doesn't happen all the time. And, it's a tough situation.
Yeah.
So it's a different business now. So what you find now is that people go to work for bigger firms and they look to learn. And if they want to go off on their own, they go off on their own. They take a few clients with them and, they start up from there. But it's a completely different business than it was, when I left it 18 years ago now.
Is it fair to characterize the business still as unscrupulous?
I think there are some areas that it is. I think now it's kind of different in the sense that with college players getting paid, you don't have to pay the college kids anymore.
Yeah.
you know, um, but
But it's different. I mean, you picture Bobby Bowden, and he had a cast iron stomach, so he was able to have a slice of mama's meatloaf and be able to survive the next hour or so before he was ended up in the hospital. And he would sit there going, "Mama, that's the best thing I've ever eaten," and the kid would sign.
yeah,
No, you're picturing. Imagine Bobby Bowden having to sit there, and not only with an accountant that's capable of doing calculus on the fly, but the kid is not sitting there with grandma anymore, but he's sitting there with a battery of agents from Rock
right.
Nation.
He's sitting there with his agent and his lawyer, and he's saying, "I want $4 million in NIL money. I want it paid out over 2 years, and or I'm not coming." And then you got and the transfer portal in NIL is out of control because the NCAA insisted on sticking with an outdated concept of amateurism
Yes,
instead of creating rules. And if they created rules and had them in place, then you wouldn't have it out of control. Instead, they just they just lived in a delusional world that Congress was going to save them and that there was going to be, structure put forth by Congress and not by them, and that isn't the case. And you kind of can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I know they think they can, but I think it's going to be tough. And so it's a completely different world now. I mean, it used to be, and when it came to kids, the big thing at that time in the late '90s and early 2000s and mid '90s, you wanted to get them in one of these athlete performance centers for combines, for the combine. So you really, if you were to get the kid, the chronology was if you got the kid after the bowl game and signed them, you would ship them out to Arizona for athletes performance, which is what I used, and that accomplished two goals. One, you got the kid in a training program to get him ready for the combine, and two, you kept him from being poached by other agents. So he's in and he's working, and you're paying that. I mean, that's coming out of your pocket, and he gets himself ready for the combine. You teach him the interview process and all of that stuff. Like I said, it's a different world now. And then because those draft positions were really important, if you can get a kid to move up 20 places in the draft, that's a hell of a selling point to the next kid you're going to next year and saying, here, I signed this guy. He was thought of to be a third round pick. Now he's at the top end of the second round. Put an extra $5 million in his pocket. That could be you. And that's kind of how it worked. Now, the rookie salary cap is slotted. Most of the bigger firms don't even charge guys. They charge them for marketing, but they don't charge them because they're all working for the second contract. They're all looking to be Brock Purdy. I'm going to get Brock Purdy. The second contract is where we're going to make the money. Excuse me.
Funny,
So it's a
yeah,
completely different business today. And
so funny you mentioned Drew. I remember meeting Drew Rosenhaus when I first came to Miami. He was just starting out as an agent. The Dolphins used to train at St. Thomas University, which was I actually the first time I went there, I just got a job at a radio station. 940 Winds was an all news station, one of several all news stations in town. We actually did 3 minute sportscasts every half hour live in the morning and afternoon drive, 8 of them. And now you would never get more than 30 seconds to do that
right.
sportscast. And in all likelihood, they don't have a guy at the station that's even doing it. But that was my job. And part of it was to go and gather clips and sound bites from the Miami Dolphins and the other teams in town and other sporting entities in town, including Highlight, which is where I met the great Marty Fleischman. Because I wasn't, I wasn't, immune or, opposed to going out and interviewing Aziz for an afternoon sports
Yeah.
from Miami Highlight. But I remember seeing Drew, and I thought, who is this fucking guy? I mean, there was a guy with giant gold chains. I think this even preceded like Flava Flav, with making that mode of fashion popular. And he was very, loud and rambunctious, and he was very accommodating to the media. He ingratiated himself extremely well to the media. He would tell you anything. And it's an interesting dynamic because the relationship between the agent and the media seemed to, make a big difference. Some were very subtle and quiet, like you never heard from them, and others yet were bombastic, like Drew Rosenhaus. Maybe less so today. He's far more subdued today now that he's worth 165 million or so. But how did that dynamic work when you?
Well, the dynamic that ended up spawning the insider business. By the early 2000s, then the insider business became a big deal.
Yes,
And the insider business was really started with guys getting fed info from agents, and that became a big deal. And it's really the shift in sports became less about what was going on the field and more about all the drama and intrigue off of it. As I was telling somebody the other day, we're more interested, I should say, fans are more interested in transactions now than they are in the games on the field. I mean, the
yes,
game literally
and
ends,
speculative
and
trades, of
you're
course.
already talking about, hey, you're bringing Sam Darnold back, and which coach is going to get a job, and
Yeah.
which coach is going to get fired, and that's the whole insider business. And the insider business really spawned from agents feeding guys in the media. They ended up making it big. The agent had a huge contact. And the agent always would remind, whether it's Jay Glazer, the late Chris Mortensen, Adam Schefter, you can name the insider. hey, I hoped you get there. You gotta help me out too. And
Sure.
that became the world. I mean, Drew was on the air at Channel 7 for how many
Yes.
years? So it was
He
it
actually got
always,
started doing that on a show I was on with the late great Jim Mad Dog Manich,
yeah,
a show called Sunday Night Sports Wrap on an independent station here. It was
right,
channel 33. He used to go down there and do it live every Sunday night. And Drew paid to be on the show. And then later, they liked the fact that he was. I mean, he wasn't telling us anything that everybody else probably didn't know, but it appeared that we were getting inside information on various players on the Dolphins. And sure enough, Channel Seven picked up on that, WSVN, and he's been on that station now doing Sunday night
right,
sports shows for the last whatever it is. That had to be 30 years ago.
yeah. And so that's how it all evolved. And so now we're consumed with transaction talk. I mean, in my opinion, it's ruined the NBA. I mean, that load management ruined the NBA because people are just, first of
Oh
all,
yeah,
people are tired of spending $300 for a ticket, and so is not playing tonight. And it's the second of a back to back, or the weather's under 55 degrees, or, we had a little rough night on South Beach, or whatever, and people are just tired of it. I mean, look at this Jimmy Butler, Pat Riley thing that's going on now. 10 years ago, people would have been firmly in Jimmy Butler's corner. Now, every Miami Heat fan I've spoken to is saying, can Riley just get rid of him? Just get him out of here.
sure.
I don't care. I mean, that's the evolution because people are just tired of it. They just said, I don't care about the drama. I want to see a guy play. I want to see the games. The games actually matter. I grew up a hockey fan, and one of the great things about hockey is those guys play no matter what. Broken jaw, they're playing. I mean,
Oh, you
you
see, a
know,
guy has a heart transplant during the second period intermission, and he's back
yeah.
out there for the
I mean,
third.
they're playing.
He's
I
got
mean,
Christian Barnard bringing him back to the
imagine
bench.
a guy get cut with a skate. He's got 40 stitches. He's out
Yeah,
for the third period. I mean, you don't see that in the NBA anymore. I
no,
mean, Zion Williamson, you got to put him on a milk carton. Does he even play? I mean, I
yeah.
saw a game the other night. Zion played, and then the next night he didn't play. It's like, what are we doing? And so I think that has. I mean, listen, load management for years hurt the Yankees. I mean, they would be resting guys, all these jagged rests, and it's like baseball's a rhythm game. You got to play it. You can't just sit guys because your sports science guy says if you sit guys 41 days a year, it's helpful to them. And finally they said, you know what, we got to play guys. They get hurt, they get hurt.
Yeah.
And that really has hurt the NBA, and it's not just a stigma; it's legit. I mean, it's just guys don't play, and I'm not talking about 40-year-old LeBron or 38-year-old Steph Curry sitting out a game or two. LeBron was 25 years old, played all the time, and when he was in Miami, he played all the time. I mean, you know, he's earned the right
Yeah.
to say, I'm gonna work on load
Did
management.
Kawhi Leonard invent the term or create the term load
Yeah, I
management?
mean,
I believe so.
Kawhi is another guy on
Yeah.
the missing persons report. And you got 23-year-old kids now that are sitting out second games of back to backs. It's like, come on, man. I hate to be that back in my day guy, but come on, you know,
I
it's
was viewed very negatively by everybody virtually.
yeah, and it's hurt the NBA dramatically.
Sure.
I mean,
If you
they
saw Jimmy
can't.
Butler sulking like he was in that one game and
Yeah,
he's taking
standing in the
3 pointers
corner
off
and
his
doing
left
all that
foot,
nonsense. And
yeah,
it's like, Jimmy, you getting paid $49 million this year.
should motivate
So,
you.
yeah,
Yes.
it's okay to play basketball. You
How
want to
about
leave
being
at the end of
responsible?
the year,
Yeah.
you're going to leave. But to pout because they won't give you a 3-year deal, it's like, why would I give you a 3-year deal when you don't want to
And you're
play?
not even playing.
Right,
All right. So you get going with tennis players, and I'm
right.
fascinated by your tennis stories, including one you told me the other night, which I want to get into. But at one time, you were like flying around with Roger Federer. Is that not correct?
For what, 6 months? I mean, Rod, Roger was an IMG client and for a long time. And he left IMG and he was going to have his family represent him. And this was at Wimbledon. And I knew the family a little bit. I knew Roger from juniors, but I wasn't friendly, and I knew them if they saw him around the grounds, say hello
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. his mom wanted to pick my brain over some things, and I said, sure. I said, and I kind of gave her some tips and what to do and
How
things
old
of
was
that
Federer
nature.
at the time? How long was he into his
Gosh,
career?
he had to be about 22 or 23 at
Wow.
the time.
Okay.
Okay, and I told him, I said, eventually you're going to need an agent, and eventually he got Tony Gottsick, who was Mary Jo Fernandez's husband. And Tony was an IMG agent, and then Tony left IMG to represent Roger. And so for a few months, I was working with him. Super guy. I mean, really easy to work with, but it was really funny. It was at the time the Motorola Razr phones. Remember those flip phones?
Yes.
Those Motorola Razrs came out. We were sitting in this cafe in London, and Roger had his Motorola Razr phone, and I said, "You see that? What you got there?" And I said, "Open it up." He opened it up, and I pointed to the camera. I said, "That's paparazzi." I said, "Everything you do, somebody will record it now. So you got to be on time. You get in an argument with your girlfriend outside someplace, you don't want to do that. It's a different world." And it's funny, years later, I saw him at the Miami Open. He said, I remember you telling me about the phone.
Uh-huh.
I said, but for tennis, I mean, tennis is, it's a global business. So,
Sure.
the day after Christmas, you're on your way to Australia and you're getting ready for Sydney and then the Aussie Open. And then you've got Doha, Qatar at the time. And then you come back here for Indian Wells and Miami. And then you go to Rome. And then you go to Paris and Wimbledon, and then you come back here for the U.S. circuit, which at that time was Cincinnati, New Haven, New York, Indianapolis. They had the clay court championships back in the red clay days when you would have the U.S. clay court championships in Indianapolis. It was like 100 degrees. The clay would be caking up. These guys are just dying,
Yeah.
and so that was the whole business. And it's really funny. You talk about how tennis business is changing. My brother's 74 years old. He still plays tennis 4 days a week.
I played the other night.
There you go.
But I
And
played
he
a guy who was crippled. I mean, he showed up.
and he was playing he plays at Delray at the tennis center there. And Guillermo Vilas, his coach, who lives in, I had no idea he lived in Delray, and he's still there. He's 80 years old. He plays four
Vilas
or
is
five
playing there?
days. No, his coach,
Oh, okay.
who was his coach, and he's hitting with ATP players.
Yeah.
It's like, and he's standing on the court hitting with them. 80 years old. And
My
he's
friend
telling one
is
kid,
the tennis pro there. His name's Jeff
yeah,
Cantor.
he's telling one kid, he said, if I could read your serve, what do you think the guys on the tour are going to be? And he was trying to get him to change telegraph his toss and stuff. But I mean, so it was an awesome time when you're young and you don't have any attachments and you're just out there, man. And it was great, and it was
What of Federer? I mean, Federer is, in my opinion, among the most distinguished ever of athletes. A guy
super guy,
that should be universally admired and appreciated by virtually everybody that was a fan of any sport or humanity, for that matter.
super
So,
guy.
what was he going through then? I mean, it was very
Trying to win his
competitive.
first major. That was the whole
Yeah,
thing. Remember when he was coming up, he was supposed to be the next great guy. And he had a period where he said something I'll never forget. He said, all I want to do is win one. If I can win one, everything else, it's okay. And if you notice, after he won his first major, then he went on a huge run because he
yeah.
never felt any pressure anymore. And even when Nadal came on the scene, and they had phenomenal matches. And Nadal, had his dominant run. Was another great guy. Roger just had a great way about him. He just didn't. He didn't live and die by what he did on the court. He felt like I did. I reached my potential. I mean, and there's so many guys that play tennis and women. They have a standard they set to themselves, and if they don't reach it, it just haunts them. I mean, I listened to Nick Kyrgios the other night. He got beat in Australia and maybe his last match, and I'm listening to him and I'm going, man, he's a therapist. He belongs in therapy. I mean, he just
People would have thought that when he was at the height of his
Yeah, I mean, he
career.
just
I do
he.
remember. I just want to interject. I do remember when Federer won his first major. I believe it was Wimbledon,
Yep.
and John McEnroe, who was just a standout commentator at that time. I don't know if his game is diminished any because I'm not sure people are accusing him of not paying the kind of attention to the game that he used to. But I remember him saying in one of the early rounds, "Watch out for this guy, Roger Federer."
Yeah.
In that particular tournament, and then he went on to win it. I don't know that. I mean, would you characterize it? You've dealt with all kinds of athletes, different sports, all the way from highlight to football. But are tennis players far and away the most sensitive and temperamental of the athletes that you dealt with?
It's up there. I mean,
Especially the women tennis players seem.
football's become that now.
Is that right?
Oh my God! I mean,
You would
these
compare
guys.
that to tennis?
Look
These
at
same
wide
players.
receivers. I
Okay.
mean, look at wide receivers in the NFL now. Oh my God! I mean, it's insane. I mean, they invented term diva now. I mean, it's like um, tennis players are sensitive because their whole lives are in a bubble. I remember Wayne Gretzky telling me a story once because I said to him, of all the people I dealt with, the most down to earth players are hockey players. By far. I mean, it didn't matter if they were Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier or the 20th guy in the roster. They're super guys. And he had an interesting thing. He said, Canada, we're 13 years old, 14 years old. If we show any potential, we're shipped off in a junior team. We have to live with a family
Yes.
and we have chores. I mean, we're not. It's not like we got a pocket full of cash and a new car and we get to do what we want. We have chores. You gotta clean your room. You gotta clean the house. You gotta do this. You gotta do
Cut some
that.
moose
You
meat.
gotta
Yeah.
walk the dog. And so there is a real life aspect to it, and it grounds them. And you don't have that in the other sports. And
I don't know that you see the unity of a team anywhere close to what you
it's the
have in the
hardest thing
NHL.
ever now. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at. I mean, excuse me. You look at just in college basketball in the last few years. Jim Larinaga, Jim Boeheim, Coach K, Tony Bennett. Go down the line, sir. National championship winning coaches, Final Four coaches. They got out. Nick Saban got out. It's not because they don't want to coach anymore. It's because they didn't want this world. Because it's impossible to build a team. I mean, to do what Danny Hurley did the last 2 years at UConn is unbelievable.
Yes.
Because how do you keep a team together? It's really, really hard to do. It's not like women's basketball's got it
Well,
easy.
Larinaga saw this coming. Now we
Oh,
frequently have him on shows that we do. He was a big fan of ours because we had some mutual attachments, which I didn't realize. I've told the story a few times. When I was a kid, about 16, used to play basketball at this park in Merrick, Long Island. And the team that held the court all night long was comprised of Dick McGuire, the former Knicks coach, who was an older guy, but probably the dirtiest player I've ever seen. Wasn't afraid to just grab some teenage kid literally and kick him in the balls.
yeah.
Dr. J, a young Dr. J, what was out there. So I have that basketball distinction of having played on the same court as Dr. J at the same time. While just watching him stand under the basket and dunk, he wasn't the flamboyant Dr. J. And there was a kid named Eddie Malloy who went to St. Agnes Prep.
I remember the name.
Yeah, and he was a standout high school player and well known throughout Long Island, which was, a reasonably high level
Right.
team to have a good reputation as a ball player. I mean, right there with New York City, and certainly, I mean, you have Dr. J out there with this guy. They would hold the court all night, but. I mentioned Eddie Malloy. I used to throw just names out at Jim Larinaga from the past. I'd give him Billy Paltz, the Whopper. I mean,
Right.
I'd throw Butch Colmives because he coached at Bowling Green, and he would get a big kick out of it. So I was running out of names. So I said, what about? I thought he went to the same school, and I think Larinaga went to Archbishop Malloy, which was another
Yes.
popular school. And so he had a great attachment, and no one in their right mind would have ever figured that you would throw Eddie Malloy out there and know anything about him. And Larinaga went off, and he remembers the fascinating thing about these coaches is they remember every fucking
Yeah.
detail. The
It's
everything
amazing.
they did in their lives. He said,
It's
"Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
I had 18 on 81 night when we played, and they were arch rivals in high school." So he was always very good with us. He felt like we knew something about the game, which is always nice to have like a little bit of a
Right.
trust factor there, that you actually have some understanding of what this guy's going through. And a few years ago, I remember it was very revealing. He literally said that this was going to ruin the game, and it just started. And that he didn't know how much tolerance and patience he might have for it. Now, it benefited him with the transfer portal and the NIL money when he took this team a couple of years ago to the Final Four. But ultimately, like you're saying, Joe, these
Couldn't
guys
hold it
that have been around
together.
for a long time, they just they couldn't deal with it.
Yeah, it's too much. I mean, and it's not like these guys lose their steam. They just you can't work in this world. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how you keep a team together. Um, because
You can't.
it's just you can't. It's
Yeah.
impossible. You look at football. I mean, guys are just shoot, shoot, shoot. I mean, they're in and out the door so fast. You don't know what hit you.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge challenge. It used to be. It was so funny. College guys used to always like to stay in college sports because it was so stable, and it was it was so stable. You had your stability. You could just recruit. You had your rosters. Now you got more stability if you're in the NFL than
Yes.
you do in college
No doubt.
sports. You look at Kirby Smart, hell of a coach. He loses his starting quarterback and 16 guys off his roster. It's like, damn,
He
how do
might
you
not
do
feel
that?
so badly about it though, since Carson Beck probably needed Tommy John surgery after the
Yeah,
injury that
but
he
but when you
received.
saw the other kid who couldn't throw the ball 4 yards,
Oh my
he's the
God,
that was
he might have been
painful
the
to
worst
watch.
backup since Skylar
Oh,
Thompson came
oh
in.
my
Ooh.
God! You watch that guy.
We
He
saw that
couldn't.
coming too. A good friend of ours, a handicapper, the professor, who's with us on Bleacher Brothers sometimes. He said this is the worst quarterback at the NCAA Division One level. So, and it's good Tasso joining the show. You're
Yeah.
wonderful, dog Tasso, getting involved here because he always likes to weigh in with an opinion. I wanted to transition quickly back because you had a great story about how people don't know who's really making the money in sports sometimes, and you represented a doubles player. Tennis fans will recognize the name Leander Paes, an Indian tennis player who I believe has a brother also. I don't know if it's a twin brother, but was he not a top-notch doubles team with his own brother?
No, no.
No.
Leander is probably one of the 3 or 4 greatest doubles and mixed doubles players in history. I think between mixed and I'm trying to remember between mixed and doubles, probably 9-time Grand Slam champion.
Yes.
But the thing about Leander was, India is a big country. People don't realize, you're watching, you're sitting there at 11 o'clock at night on bleachers, your butt's hurting on these steel bleachers, and you're watching this doubles match, and you're only you and close family members are in the stands, and
Six people. It's 11
right,
o'clock.
and you're going like, damn,
Uh,
they're a little farther away than I thought I was going to be. But Leander was a huge, huge star in India. That really the only um, only athletes in the country that were bigger stars than were the cricket players. So Leander signed, he made over $100 million in endorsements in a
Imagine that.
23-year career. Leander
That's
retired.
30,000 with his
Yeah,
partner when he wins
right.
Wimbledon, and he's making
Yeah, I
100
mean, you
million
go
on
win
the side.
Wimbledon, you get a check for 60,000 and a trophy, and he's
Yeah.
got a $5 million endorsement deal with an energy firm in India, and with $1 million bonus for winning a Grand Slam. And Leander played until he was 42 years old. And he had a hell of a run. But you're talking about a guy who made over $100 million in off court earnings. You would have never thought that.
No, and
And
that's going back a while too. So
yeah, and that's the old saying: when $100 million was $100 million.
that was it when it was really $100 million. So
Yeah,
all right,
it was it's but it's different. I mean, everything has changed so much these days, and the tech world, they're not as into tennis as they are in the other sports. I mean, Netflix is going all in with the NFL, and you're seeing that now.
although they had a
Um,
great series that was very revealing about tennis, where
yes,
Breakpoint
yep,
which I mean, like all reality shows, maybe you started to look at it and think, well, geez, they did some very careful editing here, but they brought you enough of the raw essence of what was going on, and what you don't realize as a sports fan, and this was a thing of John McEnroe's many years ago. I remember reading an article, Joe, where he said, it's embarrassing that the general public and the sports media doesn't consider tennis players to be athletes. And
Right.
he was talking about how how arduous the whole thing is. If you look back at the pace of the games when he was playing, and as talented as he was, it was nothing like today. I'm watching a match. I woke up like 2 in the morning. I'm seeing Ben Shelton, the former Florida Gator, and he's in a match against Nakashima, Brandon Nakashima,
Right.
a good player, but maybe probably considered second tier, an American player. And I'm watching it's a first round match. It's a bloodbath. I mean, the
Oh,
first set alone was to
the
make you think, my
athletic.
God, I'm exhausted just watching this shit. And then you realize how difficult it is to ascend all the way to the upper echelons of the game, like Federer did to be on top for that many years. But I mean, even just to get to the point where you're relevant is not
Yeah,
easy.
I mean, you look at Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. Had a period where they won 60 of 65 Grand Slam events. And you say, you know how hard that is? I mean, how hard it is to sustain that level of greatness against the talent that's out there today. I mean, you look at these guys today, they're
This
six
kid,
six,
18 year
six
old,
seven,
won beat
they're
Rublev in the first.
crushing balls. I
Yeah,
mean, they're just it is. I mean, it's an endurance test. You know, it's a
sure.
38-week season, you know, and
The five setters in Australia are almost cruel and unusual punishment.
oh yeah, because it's summer in
120
Australia.
degrees. You've been to the Australian Open several times, have you not?
Yeah, when it's 120, with their hard court's called Rebound Ace. It's kind of a rubberized hard court,
Yes.
and when you see it start buckling, that's
Like
when
the
you
Belt
go,
Parkway in New
yeah.
York.
I
Oh,
mean, it's like, damn, and it's
it's
125
crazy.
degrees on the court, and, you know, and these guys are out there playing a 4-hour match.
Unreal,
And
yeah. I
it's
mean,
not like there's halftime, you know. I mean, this is
saw Francis
it's
Tiafoe. He was ready to fall over the other day.
right.
He
It's
got it on
unbelievable,
victory, and now he's still got to go on and face maybe another phenom or
right?
complete unknown who happens to be great in the second round of the tournament. I want to get into your role in the NFL, and you mentioned that you had been spotting, and kind of an interesting thing because it's been something that you've been able to sustain all the way through this year. Just a couple of weeks ago, you're working the crew with Burkhardt and Tom Brady.
Hmm.
And was the production meeting the first time you met Brady?
Yeah. See, we have a mutual friend, and so he kind of broke the our mutual friend is Ross Tucker, and Ross always jokes and calls me the oldest living spotter.
He created a phenomenon for himself on social media.
Ross has done a great
Yes.
job, and I worked with Ross at Sports USA years ago. I was one of the people that pushed Larry Kahn to hire Ross, and Ross really has branched out and has done a great job with his podcast and his work with Westwood One. I work with Ross at Westwood One, and he's doing games for CBS now. And Ross is a super guy. Ross always jokes and calls me the oldest living spotter, and 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 so when I met Tom, he said, Ross said you're the oldest living spotter. I said, as long as living's in the sentence, we're all good, And so he's a good guy. My feeling about it is I don't know how dedicated he is to wanting
You
to
think he
do
might
this
not go
long
past
term.
this year? Is that?
I think what happens is, he's a part owner of the Raiders. He's making a lot of decisions there. If you're a coach, like you're Sean Payton, why are you and Fox is doing your game? Why do you want Tom Brady in your building? He's the opposition.
Yes.
It's nothing personal. It's not like he doesn't like Tom Brady. It's just like, why am I giving you secrets? Why am I having you come to my practices? I mean,
Sure.
if you're, any of the coaches, if you're Andy Reid, I mean, it has nothing to do with, we dislike. It's not that you work for the Raiders. You're running the Raiders. Why do I want you in my building? Why do I want you to see my call sheet? Why do I want you to see my practices? That's a huge conflict. I understand we live in a society today that we throw rules out the window, but that's a pretty big deal. And coaches may have changed a lot over the years, Defo, but the one thing they still are paranoid about is somebody stealing their secrets.
Yeah,
So you're you don't want him in your football
I can't
facility.
imagine. Sure.
Yeah. So
And it would be a big edge. I mean, doing much play-by-play in my lifetime, it was always good. Doing boxing, you would
right,
sit down at the so-called fighter meetings and get a little bit of a feel for, and
exactly.
some reference points, and you would be able to determine, okay, this guy said he was going to be throwing a jab all night, and he hasn't thrown once, so he's away from his game plan. But
Like I've sat in coaches meetings,
yes,
and those are and some of the guys are really really good. Like Sean McVay will tell you the first 15 plays is going to run in the game. This is
eh,
what we're going to do. I don't want you to talk about this screen pass because we're going to kind of sneak that one in. So you guys got to talk about it afterward. I mean, he's great. He's giving you the whole thing, and I'm thinking to myself, he's not going to do that with Tom Brady. No, I don't want Tom Brady to know what I'm doing.
exactly.
So it's that kind of thing, and I think that's going to be hard for Tom. And I mean, Tom's a nice guy. I mean, I only worked with him once. He was a good guy. The old saying, "Never stole a freight train." I mean, he was good people. But I'm
You
lucky.
think he's going to be an exciting element in the booth, besides the fact that he's Tom Brady and has
I think
the
Fox.
the best teeth since Secretariat? But
Yeah, I mean, Fox gave him a lot of money. I think it was before the whole Raider thing came up.
would it have been justified if the Raiders weren't involved because of his ability to communicate
Well,
what's
I
going
think
on on the field?
you're always bringing guys in. I mean, they had a great number one team in Burkhardt and Olsen. They were great, but it's Tom Brady. I mean, it's kind of like if Michael Jordan decided, hey, I really want to do color commentary of NBA
Of
games. He's Michael Jordan. They're going to put him out. They're going to put
course.
him there, and that's just the way it is. I mean, there are certain guys. In the last 20 years, really, you're Tom Brady, you're Derek Jeter, Michael Jordan. And as those guys want a broadcast career, they're getting a broadcast career. I mean, but that's a small list, So I think, I mean, look, Tom may surprise me and decide to keep doing this, but I think at some point, I think some coaches are going to say, hey, wait a second. Nothing personal, Tom, but I can't have you in my facility when, you're a division rival. I got to play you twice a year. And so that's going to be a little dicey. But
Of the teams that you work with, and you're involved with, the one and two teams all the time, various networks. What are you working for every network? Because it seems like
no, Fox, CBS, and Westwood One.
okay.
Westwood One's a radio.
Who
Um,
impresses you the most of the
well, I
team?
love Harlan. I'm going to work with Harlan in the Super Bowl. I love Harlan. He's a good guy. I'll tell you a funny Kevin Harlan story. He never used a spotter. And a few years ago, he was doing his first ever game in Miami, a Dolphins game. And the radio booths at Hard Rock Stadium, they moved to the end zone low. It's the worst radio booth in the league. And you can't see anything. And
It
so
used to
how
be
he did,
right there on a 50, but now I
right,
guess that's
right.
reserved for
Sweets took
Prince
over
Stephen
that.
Ross.
So,
Yes.
yeah, Sweets took over that. So they moved the radio people down. So Howie Deneroff, the former executive producer of Westwood One, says to me, calls me up and he says, listen, I got a job for you. You may not like it, but I got to offer you anyway. I want you to spot for Harlan. He never uses a spotter. So I don't really know. I just want you to be there and maybe, interject when you can. I said, fine. And I had not met him. I knew his brother's a broadcast agent, but I never met Kevin. The first time I meet Kevin, we're in the booth. It's maybe 30 minutes before the game's going to start. He looks at me and he says, I never use a spotter. So I said, then, looks like I got an easy payday. And so he started laughing and all that. So the game starts. And of course, second play of the game is a 40-yard pass down the far end of the field. And, you just can't see it. And Harlan looks at me and he goes, And he points to his board, and he said, "Okay, I'll spot." And so it worked out fine. And he was a good dude, and I have a nice relationship with him. I mean, Ross and I are close. Tom McCarthy I've known for a long time, and I've done games with Tom, and Tom is sensational. And I'm lucky. I've got a good group of people that I work with, but I'm also old enough now to where I don't give a shit. It's like if you don't like me, you don't use me again, I'll live. It's like so there's an attitude that comes from that you can just do your thing. You just do your job. You stay out of the way. You're not looking to glad hand anybody. You're not looking to overtake anybody, and it works out fine. And it's worked out well. And then, you know, it helps when games are in New Orleans and I know New Orleans so well and guys eat well, then they tend to like me. So it all
But
works out.
what's
But
your place there that you always recommend? That's
oh,
your favorite.
Brightson's the best restaurant in New Orleans for 30 years.
I
Up,
imagine you'll
up
be
in the
making
Riverbend. Yeah, I'll be there for the
Super
Super
Bowl.
Bowl for sure.
All
But
right, good.
but
Hey,
I'm lucky. It's a good group of people. I bounce around from crew to crew. Kevin Kugler, I've done a bunch of games with Westwood One, and he's getting more TV time now. Kevin is great. He's a rising star. Adam Amin hit it when he went to Fox, and he's well deserving. Jason Benetti. There's a lot of talent in the booths now, and that's why it's another reason why Brady has a big hill to climb as a broadcaster because there's a lot of talent there now. It's different when you're. Troy Aikman said this the other day, and it couldn't have been more correct. When you're a quarterback, you have a record. You're completing 65% of your passes. You got 30 touchdowns. You're 14-4. There's a record that's a body of work, and that is how you're judged. As a broadcaster, you don't have a record. It is how are you on that day? And if you mess up some names or you misapply a rule, people remember that.
Costas, I
And
mean, being a prime example, where
yeah,
it became apparent that the guy, as brilliant as he was throughout his career as a play-by-play guy, now I
yep,
always enjoyed his play-by-play because
yep,
his delivery was spot on. He had great insights, and all of a sudden, and you probably can relate to this. Didn't it? Wasn't that in the Yankee game where he thought the ball had gone through for a base hit and 2 runs were going to score, and it turned out
yeah.
not. And people
And this
started
is what
hammering it on
happens.
social media today.
Oh,
You get instant reaction from
right.
people. I
Within
mean,
seconds,
I'll
you're
be doing
torched.
play-by-play on something, and the people are already sending in, "Who is this asshole?"
Right.
Yeah, what's he talking about? And yeah, and you get it now even when you're doing these streaming shows where
Yeah,
people can comment on a chat line and they're saying, "What the fuck is this?" So yeah, it's a whole different world in terms of the instant criticism. But
exactly. And it's and you really have a big mountain to climb. I mean, you're not being Tom Brady's going to get you so far. But then you got to show you have the chops in the booth. I mean, it's
yeah,
hard. I mean, in some ways, it's unfair to him. He didn't become Tom Brady as a football player. He didn't play the first 12 weeks of the season until Drew Bledsoe got hurt,
sure.
and he didn't become Tom Brady until he won that Super Bowl. And then, it's
And
like,
probably one of the most interesting coaching decisions ever, where
right,
Belichick. Everybody goes back to Drew Bledsoe. In fact, it wasn't even cliche. It was etched in stone that you're not going to lose your starting job to an injury.
right.
And here's Bledsoe. I mean, Hall of Fame quarterback and or caliber anyway. And he comes back. He's ready to go, and he says, "I'm going with this kid who wasn't overwhelmingly impressive, but he was decent." And Belichick stuck with him. The rest is history.
And you know what the amazing thing about that was? As much as to this day Drew Bledsoe hates Bill Belichick's guts, he and Brady get along, are friend, very friends. They're friends.
Sure,
It speaks to what a good guy Brady is. And people that have talked to him before, they all said the same thing. He's a really good guy. You're going to find he's a really good guy. And you can see why. He's one of these guys that's an inclusive guy. He's not, you know, over here. And it's a funny story. I played a golf tournament years ago in Jupiter, and Michael Jordan was playing in the tournament, and they had the PR guy comes up to us. Speak to Mike when he's playing. Don't say anything to him. It was like this laundry list of what
sure,
you couldn't do. You know what I mean?
right.
So we didn't do anything. the end of the round, Jordan looks at us and says, like, don't you guys talk? Like, yes. He said,
Yeah, what
and
the
we
fuck's
said,
wrong
well,
with
we
you?
were told we couldn't talk. And he's just like shaking his head, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But Brady's a very inclusive guy. And you know, and that's when you see the way he works with people and handles people and behind the scenes people, he treats everybody well. And he's very popular because of that, you know. And
Yeah.
I've worked with guys, not naming names, that were, you know, not at his level of stardom, but man, they acted like they were.
An ego
And
is a terrible thing.
oh my God, I
All right,
mean,
I have to get a
treating
couple of quick takes from you here because the hour's flying by, as it often does on conversations, but even especially so this week with all of your, I mean, different things that you've done. Quite a mixed bag of
just trying to keep my head above water, Defoe.
yeah, no, it's great. All right, I say Aaron Boone. You say what? I know you're the
uh,
biggest diehard Yankee fan. We have to preface this with that. You live and die with the Yankees, no matter what's going on. They could be playing a West Coast game, and you have a 6 o'clock business meeting here on the East Coast. You're still watching all 9 innings, and if it goes
yep.
extra, you're right there for the end. I know you're not especially flattering towards the managerial abilities of one
I,
Aaron Boone.
company man. He's what they want. You know, he's company man. I don't think he's a bad manager. I don't think he's a great manager, but he's a company man, and that's what the Yankees want.
According to
You
your
know,
Facebook post, though, the guy shouldn't even have a position on the earth. I mean, much less
you
the
know,
Yankee.
he's. You know, I think this year is going to be very interesting because now, I mean, for years they were fundamentally one of the worst teams in baseball, and it showed up blowing a 5-run lead in the World Series
Base running
when
was
they right
atrocious.
base running and defense, and now they're addressing base running and defense. So it's going to be very interesting to see that evolution of the Yankees because they got embarrassed in the World Series because they couldn't run the bases and they couldn't make routine plays in the field. Um, so, but I would say he's a company man. You know, that's what they want, and he's giving them what they want.
Yeah, I don't know. I know some other diehard Yankee fans. They would have been far less diplomatic than you've just been talking about Aaron Boone. I mean, they would like to see him, completely disappear from the planet, and certainly didn't, find themselves in favor of him returning for next year. Although you can't fire a guy who makes it
Yeah,
to
you can't fire a guy who
in the
went to the
World
World
Series.
Series.
So that
Right.
was his salvation. All right. Now you've seen a ton of teams because you've been all over the country this year following NFL games, working in a booth with a variety of announcing teams. And so you get a very descriptive, firsthand description of what's happening there. You're watching a game through binoculars.
Right.
We're in the second round now of the playoffs. I don't know that there were overwhelming, stunning surprises. I guess Houston dominating the Chargers in that game and winning by 20 in a game that they were underdogs at home. They seem to be fading. They have the inglorious task now of having to go to Kansas City and play. Um, what do you see? I mean, the general consensus seems to feel you can throw an umbrella over the two teams that'll be matched up this week in the AFC. Baltimore, who you were at the Ravens game this past weekend. Uh,
Baltimore's the I haven't seen the Chiefs or Lions in person this year. Baltimore is the best team I've seen in person.
okay.
They're really good. I mean, and when they
And
moved
you were
Kyle
standing next to
Hamilton,
Derrick Henry as he was coming out on the field.
yeah,
My
oh my
understanding.
God. I mean,
Well, what a beast, huh?
I mean, you look at him and you go, that's a defensive lineman. That's not a running back, you know. And but they're the best team I've seen in person. But what the Lions are doing, I mean, it's like you hear coaches say all the time, injuries no excuse, right? The Lions lost 9 of their 11 starting defensive players. And Aaron Glenn has them playing unbelievable defense. I mean, they're picking guys up off the street. There's a guy who's working at Whole Foods on Tuesday, and on Sunday he's playing D line for the Lions, and he's making plays. I mean, what Aaron Glenn has
One
done
day
with
he's
that
filling a hot
defense,
buffet, and
yeah, what Aaron Glenn has done with that defense,
yeah.
and with the whole we always talk about culture, and that's the fun word now everybody's throwing out there. But you look at the culture change in Detroit from what they were. I mean, Matthew Stafford is the second best player in the history of the Lions next to Barry Sanders. And they traded him to Detroit. and got Jared, I mean, to LA to get Jared Goff, who was supposed to be a placeholder. And Jared Goff's going to get MVP votes this year. He's been phenomenal. But
Yes.
the whole
That's definitely
culture change under Dan Campbell and how they, going for it all the time on fourth down, not using injuries as an excuse. When Dan Campbell was in Miami, Dan Levitard nicknamed him Man Campbell, which was hilarious because Dan, he's always into these, he had all the coach speak down and he was stuff. But that guy
and
was
he looks like Cro-Magnon man.
right.
Like you could literally see him eating a wild boar in
But
front of
that
his
guy,
team, like he was Jackie Sherrill castrating a cow to motivate.
exactly. And that guy's a hell of a football coach. And I remember when he was in New Orleans, I remember Sean Payton saying to me one day, that guy's going to be a hell of an NFL head coach.
Wow,
And the teams that don't get him are going to regret it. And he's turned out to be right. I mean,
seemed like
nothing
a nutbag
against
at that opening presser.
nothing against Mike McDaniel, but if Dan Campbell's coaching the Dolphins, they got an entirely different makeup. They're not putting
Yes,
up with the crap from Tyreek Hill, and they're not paying two wide receivers $190 million, and they're not signing Shaq Barrett and then let him go in week 15 because he didn't want to play,
yeah,
and all that nonsense. Late to meetings, all that stuff. None of that stuff happens in Detroit. None of that stuff happens in Baltimore or Kansas City, and but Baltimore's the best team I've seen all year in
okay,
person. But that Baltimore Buffalo game is going to be spectacular. I mean, that's you got two heavyweights. That's Ali and Foreman. I
yes,
mean that's as good as it gets.
and
Um,
in all likelihood, the distinction they gained by moving on is to have to go on the road to maybe a 20 below Kansas City
yeah, yeah, exactly. And
and face the Chiefs, who
yeah,
were. Is it unfair to assume that they probably will prevail, point spread notwithstanding, over the Houston Texans, who
yeah. I
I
mean,
gave
I
little
don't see the
chance of being in
Texans
this spot.
winning that game. Unless Mahomes has four interceptions or something that
Yeah,
flips the field. Um, the Rams are that team you always hear the cliche every year. You don't want to meet that team in the playoffs.
uh-huh.
If you're the Eagles, that's the last team you want to play in the playoffs right now, are the Rams. You
Well, would
know,
have to give them certainly a chance to cover the point spread in that game.
yeah. I mean, look at Chris Shula, Don Shula's grandson.
Yes,
How old I am, I used to see Chris Shula with his dad David walking around the Dolphins practice facility when he was a kid. And now he's a defensive coordinator of the Rams and is going to get head coaching interviews. 9 sacks last night. I mean, come on.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's if you're Philadelphia and you've had a great season, but that team is always full of
How
drama.
is Dan
Siri,
Shula not the DC here? That's pretty amazing.
isn't that wild? I know.
I mean, with
But they
all the
have a
people
good one in
advising
Anthony
Stephen
Weaver.
Ross, how'd they let
They,
that one slip by?
But I mean, they have a good one in Anthony Weaver, though. He can coach. He can coach. He's going to be a future head coach in this league. But that's going to be the Rams are the team you don't want to face in the playoffs because they have no fear, and McVay's going to throw everything at the Eagles. And if the Eagles play like they did the other day, they'll lose that game. And then you got Detroit. I mean, man, Jaden Daniels, what he's done to the Commanders. I mean, there have not been a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL this year that have played the last 2 minutes of games as well as Jaden Daniels. And he's a rookie. I mean, it's
Incredible
unbelievable
stats, fourth
what
quarter
what
and over.
he's done. You know,
Incredible.
the Lions are healthier than they've been in a long time. That may help, but that's going to be a hell of a game. And I personally, I'm not supposed to root, but I'm rooting for a Baltimore Detroit um, Super Bowl because I think that would be an unbelievable matchup. And I think for the city of Detroit to have the let's put it this way: you don't want. Think of this: if Detroit wins and the Rams upset the Eagles, you got Matthew Stafford going to Detroit to go the greatest single season in Lions history, and you got the second best player in the history of the Lions could cost them their season. I mean, that's you want to talk about a
Yeah, hell of
storyline.
a
That would
story,
be
for sure.
unbelievable, right? I mean,
Believe it or
that
not,
that would be
Joe,
amazing.
we've run up to the end of the show.
All right.
As I always say to AJ Johnson, the great AJ Johnson, the man behind Bleacher Brothers, we barely scratched the surface of the things we wanted to talk about, which is always a lot of fun. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to
My
Tasso
pleasure.
for weighing in on the program. And we'll talk to you again. Hopefully, see you
So
real soon.
sounds good, Defo. It's great being with you.
All right. Joe
Bye
Casale,
bye.
ladies and gentlemen, sports agent. Certainly a wealth of experiences that he's had throughout his lifetime. All right, Toby, that's going to do it for today's edition of Conversations. Looking for some big things. Watch for some future developments here involving shows in the morning. I don't want to spill the beans too soon, but AJ has some big plans, and we want to be a big part of it. So that's going to be fun. Toby, congratulations on breaking all internet records for views and clicks and treatments, as they call them. Tremendous job by you up there. I'm a little disappointed because I really saw you with like a pineapple on your head somewhere out there in Hawaii on AJ's ticket. But if it was only Orlando, you could have caught the Brightline or driven there, and that takes a lot of the romance out of that whole story. But nonetheless, a great job, and nice to see Bleacher Brothers registering such a big score with new viewers. Thanks so much for being with us, everybody. For Toby, for our guest this week, Joe Casale, we'll have another special guest coming up next week. Working on a couple of things. I think you guys will really be happy and entertained, and that's the way we roll. So we'll see you next time on the next edition of Conversations.